Where do I start with this? Well, I guess I would have to begin by saying everyone in the family is sensitive to the paranormal side of things. Case in point, my sisters can hear things going bump in the night while my father has had some sort of guardian angel act as an early warning for when things are about to go bad. In that case, it's our old family cat. My mother never spoke about us, but her mother said she was sensitive too, in a way. As for me, well, I guess you'd say I'm a sort of an exorcist. I say sort of because the church recognizes me as the level of a deacon thanks to my time in the service, meaning I can hand out communion, but I sure can't lead a sermon. This is probably why our family members are considered so strange, at least in that way. It isn't like we don't have friends or relationships. It's just we don't perceive things the same way they do. Now, since that's out of the way, let's get into what happened. It was the middle of summer, so of course the kids were off of school, and a few of them thought it would be nice to stop by my place on their way to their vacation spot. I would go with them, but you have to be invited, of course. Then again, I'm not sure if I could just take off of work. A decent job is getting difficult to come by, and an old warhorse like me, it's getting even worse and worse. Well, I'm renting a rather large house for just one person. The rent in this area is cheap as long as you don't mind the commute. I'm an early riser anyway, so it really isn't a big deal. Regardless of that, they all arrived a bit late, which gave me enough time to have everything ready for them to come in. They had been on the road for several days at this point. It wouldn't be so bad except there is no privacy on the road. This meant that everyone was a little pent up from being stuck in a vehicle and needed some time to get a relief from the drive. With the youngest kids, this simply meant letting them run around for a few hours and, of course, letting them swim in the pool. There was only one teenager, my nephew, around 14 years old if I think so. So he swam, but I could just tell he wanted to find one of the neighborhood girls to hang out with. Too bad for him, the closest neighbor's daughter is leaving for college this fall, so a little bit out of his range. With all this moving around, it was nice to let the parents swim just for a little bit to kind of stretch their muscles and relax with a few cocktails. I even turned on the jacuzzi if they wanted. So, all in all, it was a nice afternoon for everybody. Nothing from that could have prepared us for what was going to happen, though. It must have been close to midnight when we finally got everybody to sleep. You would think after burning so much energy, the kids would have crashed out early, but nope. I give my siblings and their spouses the beds while the kids are split between the two other smaller rooms. Yes, it's a 4-bedroom. But that just meant I had to crash out on the couch, giving up all the beds to those who've been on the road. Nothing wrong with that, but it does make me sleep rather light, I guess you could say. Though it was summer, I woke up with a slight chill in the air. I shook slightly. I may have had the fans running, but it shouldn't feel that cold. I was about to go back to sleep when I saw something. In the reflection of the main window directly across from me, I could see the shadow of someone walking across the living room. The only light silhouetting it came from the kitchen stove that I had left on just in case somebody needed something from the kitchen. They wouldn't have to turn any lights on to find their way to the fridge. I also put my side of the couch in complete darkness. Even if someone looked into the reflection, they wouldn't be able to see me. As I watched for a few moments, I realized that the shadow had a clearly female form to it. But something was very, very wrong. It almost looked like its hair was extremely tall, and it was carrying a backpack? What? I thought to myself, I gained more consciousness. That doesn't make sense. No one has their hair up like that unless you just got out of the shower. But if they did, why would they put on a pack? The seconds slowly ticked by as I began to see it more clearly. It didn't walk, but instead seemed to glide across the floor as if it wasn't even stepping on it. My hardwood floors didn't squeak, however, I should feel the subtle changes of the floor with every step. But nothing. Silently, I watched as it went to the hallway where the two smaller bedrooms were. Once it was out of sight, I silently got up and followed it. I looked down the hall just in time to see the very edge of it turn into the room where some of the kids were in. Okay, what the fuck is going on? I silently said to myself as I got to the corner of the hallway. Looking around the corner, I could see that the door to the kids' room was almost completely open. The red light from the alarm clock showed enough for my eyes to see the first bed. There was my oldest niece, sound asleep, lightly snoring, as I moved slowly into the hallway. As I turned to look at the other bed, my heart skipped a beat and my blood ran cold. There was someone, or maybe I should say something, standing at the foot of my nephew's bed. It was staring at him as he silently slept. With a little bit of light, I could see a little bit more of the silhouette. The form was clearly that of an adult female, and well-developed one, but not overly so. The long hair that fell down her back flowed right down to a set of looked like wings attached to the lower back just above the pelvic bone. This was bad enough, but the stranger parts were the large horns that seemed to come halfway between her hairline and the top of her head. These horns curled back, kind of like ram horns, but didn't curl back up to her ears. I was in shock at the sight of this woman that I'd never seen. It was standing in my house and seemingly watching over my kin. After about a minute, I saw my nephew roll onto his back, and that's when something odd happened. There was a sudden smell of perfume in the air. It was very subtle at first, but soon became overwhelming. Now, something you should know about me is that I truly hate the smell of strong perfumes. In fact, too much perfume has made me leave dates early. I just can't stomach it. So the smell of this was not intoxicating as one might think, but to me, more nauseating than anything else. Once the smell permeated the room, enough that I had to hold my nose to keep from gagging, that is, she reached down and began to pull the covers off of him. Reaching down, she slowly pulled the covers down past his feet, exposing him to the night air. Then she began to move up and caress his leg as she slowly began to move up his body. That is when I saw his eyes burst open and the fear enter his blue eyes. I could see him start to struggle, but he was having trouble moving. From that point, she climbed onto the bed and began to hold him down by placing her hand on his shoulder, and while the other one pushed his hand away and down onto the bed, when she moved her leg up to straddle him, I tried to stop her. That is, I tried. My body didn't want to move. It was strange, but my muscles didn't want to respond to the commands I gave them. I was confused as I feared I wouldn't be able to stop her. By now, I had figured out what this was. Even though the logical part of my brain fought me, there was no denying the truth. What had come into my house for nefarious reasons was a succubus. Now, I'm no spring chicken, so I know a few things about the paranormal. Doesn't hurt that I dated a witch before, too. Plus, I had a few tricks up my sleeve. It must have sensed my fear because it turned and looked at me, still standing in the doorway. I looked at it right in the eyes, and I could see those green eyes, those emerald eyes, look right back at me. Those eyes were not green like you would think, but dark green like you would see almost on a tractor, or maybe in a comic. She still had her human iris, but the rest of her eye was that deep, deep green. As she looked at me, her hands continued to caress my nephew's body as though it was slowly putting a dry rub on a brisket. Then she did something I will never forget. She smiled at me. That smile was not filled with shark teeth. like some would think, but instead an almost human smile. The kind of smile someone's give when they know they're about to pull one over on you, and you can't do a damn thing about it. With sheer arrogance in her voice, she said to me, "You're next." As I saw her hand begin to lower onto my nephew, while this was happening, her body seemed to get more and more visible, as though she was becoming solid. Thinking fast, I needed to find a way out of this paralysis. I could have kicked myself for not realizing sooner, but the perfume must be the reason. So if it was a chemical reaction, then I have something for it. You see, I'm not the only one that can adjust their chemical composition, at least for a short while. Think of adjusting your brain to push off the effects of being drunk. Many people can do it, but it's a very temporary solution, and the headache that follows from it is very far from fun. Using this, it only took a few seconds for me to break out of the paralysis and be able to move freely again. I could see the utter terror in my nephew's eyes as she lifted her body in order to mount him. Sprinting from my position, I jumped onto her, causing us both to crash onto the floor. Being able to get her by surprise, I was able to take her back and get a quick choke on her. This proved difficult as her horns prevented me from getting my arm fully into position, though I did get my other arm around her neck. Remembering my old training, I dug my heels into her thighs. Good thing too, because my training never covered how to do this when somebody has extremely powerful wings. She tried to pull my arm away from her neck as she violently thrashed around with her wings. Her wings were so powerful that with each flap they bounced and crashed us around the room. As I was not used to doing jiu-jitsu against someone so thin, she was able to duck her jaw and bite down hard into my arm, so much so that I thought she was going to take a piece out. Grabbing her ear, I pulled enough that she screamed and lifted her head to try and alleviate the pain. This just allowed me to reset my arm into her neck. Now I got her, I thought, as I could feel her supple neck against my bicep muscle and forearm. The noise must have woke everyone because lights began to flip on as numerous people came running into the room, cursing and coming out as the children were picked up and rushed out of the room. My brother tried to help me subdue this thing, but the violent thrashing made that not possible. I suddenly found myself wishing that I had told them where I keep my firearms beside the safe. That is when the bitch truly got serious. She took her tail and penetrated me with it. Now, I've been shot, and I would rather do that 100 times over than experience the pain I went through at that moment. Then something happened I didn't think she was ready for. Instead of letting go, my muscles tightened, making it nearly impossible for her to breathe. As my legs tightened down, cracking her ribs, and I started cursing and using the Lord's name in vain. As I calmed down a little, I was saying, "Oh God, oh God, oh God!" And this made her begin to lose the strength she had. I'll admit, I was in far too much pain to know this until her body began to slump and she retracted her tail from my thigh. I looked at her in the eyes, and she looked at me with sheer contempt, asking me, "How could you have this power? You are no priest." I chuckled and told them that the army has authorized me to be recognized at the level of a deacon, even though the church only saw me as an altar server. The hate in her eyes at that point could have stopped the herd of elephants on meth. Moving my hand, not the one around her neck, but the one on her forehead, I began to demand her name. Of course, she wouldn't give it, so on to plan B. I began to pray to God and Jesus to cleanse this lost child and forgive her sins, free her from the shackles of this form, and bring her to faith as she enters your house. I continued as she began to thrash again, but this time getting weaker and weaker. This time my brother was able to help hold her down, and as I reached up to the end of my prayer, she screamed out her name. I demanded her true name as she looked at me with true fear for the first time. I placed my hand back on her head and I made the sign of the cross. This seemed to cause her even more pain as I demanded her true name. After a few moments, she said it. In truth, I expected something impossible for me to pronounce, though it was surprisingly easy. I will not say it here, but I will say that before I let my grip loosen, I tested it out with a silent prayer. Her reaction was a jolt, as though someone had just electrocuted her. Before releasing my grip, I used her name to command her to remain in her current form until I say otherwise. I picked her up, let her go, and placed her on the edge of the bed she was about to assault my nephew on. While my brother's wife and my sister patched me up, we inquired of the purpose she had in this house. She answered calmly as we finally got a really good look at her. Her naked body was like something you would see in a CGI model. Her proportions seemed to be slightly exaggerated, but not to a comic degree. Her tan and almost purple skin was flawless, minus the injury she had just occurred, of course. Her beautiful face, tight waistline, toned legs, and of course those perfectly formed breasts would make even those most chaste men think of impurity. The horns, though, similar to ram horns, were smooth to the touch, and almost silky smooth like her hair was as it went down her back. The wings, for being so freakishly strong, were rather thin and small given her size. I was having trouble figuring out how she could fly with them. Then there was that tail. That damn tail. Even the thought of it made my leg clench up a little bit. Though not a very long tail, it was clearly pure muscle. Looking at it again made me feel even more pain, kind of like a ghost pain, and I wanted to rip it off her pelvic bone. She did apologize for her actions, but that didn't make me feel any better. Going to need to pick up a donut later. Thanks a lot, lady. After getting the entire situation, I had to restrain my sister from going at this creature with a kitchen knife. It was her son that was nearly assaulted after all. Although, thanks to my brother's level-headed thinking, we came up with a better idea. Since she, as a demon, we made a deal. She would protect the family from harm whenever possible, along with keeping other demons at bay or far enough away where they didn't affect us. In return, the houses that the family lived in would become sanctuary to her, though every time she was present, she would have to make herself known to the family, though she would not have to reveal herself physically unless asked by one of the family. She would only take from the family that which is freely given and must repay with something of equal value. If another demon became a threat to her, she would simply need to bring us a name, and we would aid her in protecting her from harm. In return, she would have free rein to punish those who have taken advantage of the family. All in all, a good, equitable deal. Excellent for both sides. Now, I wouldn't have made this deal without a little insurance. Since I know her true name, I can call her back whenever I need to. Though it is a very bad idea to push the boundaries of a deal like this, I'll still keep it in my back pocket, just in case. When everything was said and done, she stood up and walked to me. I asked her if she was ready to seal the contract, and she was. For those that don't know, if you're going to seal the contract with a succubus, you need to exchange fluids and, like any old leather, seal it with a kiss. Since she had bitten me, which I would need stitches for, as I could see the blood still coming out from the bandage, we had covered the first part. I gave her a quick kiss that she wanted. I made sure not to linger in order to make sure I didn't fall under her succubus sway. After this, we walked her to the back door and watched as she simply faded away as she walked through the threshold. That was almost 10 years ago now, and she's protected us from several things. Things like my niece almost getting into a car wreck, or my brother almost missing out on his daughter's birthday due to some asshole boss, even helping my nephew find a good girl to date and eventually got married to. She even comes to visit me when she needs a place to hide for a while, though I do have to keep telling her to put some frickin' clothes on. Not that I mind, but I have very large windows in this house. I can always tell when she goes after the buttholes, the bullies, the jerks, Just royal pains in the butt within this town, and I just can't help but smile a little bit. Though I did have to laugh maniacally when she found out an ex-girlfriend was planning on hurting me on social media. Why? I found out she was cheating, and I kicked her to the curb for that. And when she was about to besmirch my name, no call to the police just to make me look like the biggest freak in this entire town. Well, let's just say nothing like a visit from a succubus while you're live streaming to get you banned. With all this, I just hope God doesn't mind that this family's guardian angel is no angel.